Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars.
SoundCartel.
Building personas or avatars can help you visualize your audience or the kind of brand you want to be. But what about the kind of leader you are? Well, with 5 leadership archetypes, which one are you? From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. Are you an elder, a warrior, or a diplomat? Perhaps you're a guardian or a pioneer. No, we're not role-playing. It's your leadership archetype. Leadership expert Zoe Routh asks you to choose which of the 5 archetypes best reflects the way you lead. Zoe is a sought-after leadership expert who herself has had leadership roles, including President of the Chamber of Women in Business. Her latest book, People Stuff, is like a mirror. It forces you to examine the way you are and how you deal with the people around you. Zoe Routh explains to Chris Ashmore the importance of self-perspective.
Self-awareness is the core to good leadership. So if we do not know ourselves well, then we will be suffering under constant reactive mode. We'll always be reacting to the people and things around us, and we'll never be able to respond in a way that puts our best image forward and also in a way that serves others well. So unless we do the hard work, and it is hard work to learn about ourselves, then we will never be able to grow effectively as a leader and to be of better service to our teams and to our organizations and to our communities. So that is the number one practice as a leader, is to figure out who we are and how we show up and the impact that we are having, intentional or not.
Now, you identify 5 archetypes in leaders. Can you tell us what they are and why did you choose them specifically?
I chose archetypes as something to help serve us when we're looking at who we are and how we show up, because archetypes create architecture for action. They are a common pattern of a story that we are most familiar with. And whether we say pirate or whether we say sailor or mother or dog trainer, instantly we have an image in our mind about each of those figures and the kind of experiences that they might undergo. So when we use archetypes to help shape how we show up and the nature of our leadership, we embody those characteristics, we embody those stories. So that was why I chose archetypes, first of all. And then the 5 that you talk about, the central one, which is the one archetype to rule them all, kind of like, Lord of the Rings analogy there, is the elder. And for me, the elder manages to exemplify the best practice of perspective so that the elder can be both forward-thinking into the future as well as being extremely present to the present moment. And they're balancing wisdom, compassion. And the elder sort of exemplifies the best practice of perspective. So what other things we are doing, then we should always be able to channel our inner elder, because we always want to be wise and compassionate. The other 4 start off with the warrior. And the warrior is all about winning, and usually winning rights or winning back territory, not trying to win over people, but to win something back for self, for the team, for the organization or community. And they're trying to protect something. So there's this idea, this energy around we need to fight to preserve and save something. And the warrior ethos really came to the fore at the beginning stages of the pandemic as leaders went, holy cow, this is a big threat to who we are in all of our businesses and how we survive as people and as families and as communities. And so this warrior energy came out in the earlier stages of the pandemic. So warrior is one of the fabulous archetypes. Counterpoint to that is the diplomat. And the diplomat is all about winning as well, but with a different kind of ethos. They want to progress, not necessarily protect, and they come with a win-win principle. So they don't want to win in spite of others. They want to win alongside others. And this diplomat energy is very staid and stoic and determined. So the determination is the same along the warrior, but the energy is quite different in terms of let's be collaborative as opposed to the warrior, which is let's do this and win this back. And the other 2 archetypes, the next one is the guardian. I think the guardian is the toughest one because the guardian hangs between the idea of wanting to progress something in a business and wanting to protect something. So it's kind of like 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, and they hang in the balance in some ways. And so they're often in an organization They play the role of devil's advocate, the hang on a minute, have we considered all the repercussions of this? And they often say things like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So they're a leveling influence. And sometimes we have to play the guardian. And when I talk to leaders in the sort of first third of the pandemic experience that we've had so far, a lot of them said that they were definitely leaning on the guardian to help them deal with what was going on. So it's kind of like, let's eke our way forward and hang on to what we know is the best part of our work. And the fifth one is the pioneer. And this is when it's blue sky thinking and all sails unfurled and off we go to explore the horizon. This is really about building and progressing. It's got the energy of newness and exploration and adventure and experimentation. So you can see there's quite a different kind of lens that each of these brings to the fore. And I think if we remember any of them, just remember the elder, because that will serve us best in any context, to be wise and compassionate, thinking forward and backwards, to be forward thinking and to be present minded.
When a leader is looking at or identifying with one of these archetypes, do they all each have both positives and negatives, and understanding that is important? Would that be fair to say?
I call those shadows. Yeah, each archetype has a shadow. And that means when we swivel our focus away from others onto our own personal concerns is the trigger of the shadow of each archetype. So what's the shadow of the elder? It sounds like such a great archetype. Well, when the elder gets so emboldened by their savviness and their contribution, they start to embrace the accolades that they're getting and the approval that they're getting, you can suffer from the rise of hubris, arrogance. And it's arrogance that can scupper our best version of the elder, and we turn into tyrants. And my favorite example of this, and I've just read the biography that came out about him, is Adam Newman, the former CEO of WeWork. And he starts off as the classic elder. You know, his vision for WeWork was amazing. Let's build communities at work. Let's build a place where people belong and they're forward thinking and they're sharing things and it's an energizing place. And by all accounts, the communities were like that at the beginning. And it was a bold vision. He wanted to transform the world. And he had this huge language of an elder, like let's transform communities and organizations and the planet. He wasn't interested in anything else. So he said. And then what happened? He started to get so much recognition and so much accolades around what he was doing that his arrogance and his pride grew. And this is all laid out in the fabulous book called The Power Paradox by Dacher Keltner. And the study of power is quite interesting. He basically calls it a bit of brain damage. When we get too high on our own power, we forget about the people who put us in the powerful place in the first place, and we become too concerned about hanging on to power because it's so energizing. We lose our capacity to empathize and be compassionate, and we turn into a bit of a jerk, essentially. And that's how a tyrant can come out of an elder. And that shadow side is, in the elder's case, is around hubris. And each of the other archetypes has a shadow side as well.
Well, finally, Zoe, who do you recognise as a great leader?
Oh, I have quite a few. I think an Australian one, Dr. David Cook. He's general manager at Konica Minolta. And I met him a few years ago we were doing a speaking course together. And I had the great pleasure and privilege of sitting next to him. And he was a quiet, humble guy. And gradually I found out about what he did in his workplace. And he'd written a PhD on social contribution of businesses and how businesses can be also great corporate citizens. And I learned more and more about what he was doing at Konica Minolta. And he managed to transform a lot of the culture there with this principle of doing business and doing good are not mutually exclusive. And all of his projects that he set up there were quite amazing. And it made me inspired to think about business and all the good that we can do in partnership with community, not just to hand out checks to community organizations, but to actively involve our people, our staff, in contribution to community is pretty core. So there was the high-mindedness, the elder type of attitude towards business that was inspiring with him. And it was also his demeanor and the way that he was always so generous and focused on you as he spoke to him. And all the great leaders that are admired have this ability to be fully present with you and to make you feel important. Now, they say that great leaders, you don't remember what they do, you remember how they made you feel. And I think Dr. David Cook is a true, wonderful example of that. And this is actually a critical piece to avoiding any of the shadows of the archetypes is where is your focus? Where is your lens? If your lens is on you and your concerns, then you're not being in service. So make sure that your gaze is fully on the other, and you will dial down your shadows and dial up the best version of your archetype that you're choosing to embody at the time.
That was leadership expert Zoe Routh. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow at BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel.